If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 133, The Truth Discovered by Sense. As expected, despite Sense's cold personality, her spacious room had an unexpectedly girlish charm. The walls were adorned with elegant fabrics and exquisite landscape paintings. A large bookcase filled with neatly arranged books stood against one wall. At the center of the room was a large carved bed draped with silk sheets, and near the head of the bed sat a dressing table. Although the dressing table was also cluttered with books, there were surprisingly a few cosmetic items placed on it, though none seemed to have been used. On the desk, alongside stacks of books, were some peculiar magical artifacts. The air in the room was subtly infused with a faint, pleasant fragrance. This caught Ash's attention. He instinctively leaned closer, sniffing the air, then unconsciously picked up a strand of Sense's long hair to confirm the scent. Nodding to himself, he mused aloud. "Is that so? You've used a nice incense in your room. It's different from the scent of your hair, but it must make your whole body. What are you trying to do?" Sense reacted like a startled animal. Though her face remained expressionless, her hands instinctively covered her chest, and her beautiful long hair seemed to fall in front of her like a protective barrier. "Who do you think I am? I'm just commenting on the scent, not trying to smell you," Ash said, sighing. Sense said nothing, but her wary expression clearly conveyed her thoughts. This person could absolutely do something like that. Ash understood her silent judgment, and knowing it was futile to try to clear his name, he simply spread his hands. "Don't be so guarded. Even I wouldn't do anything reckless, but... No, it's nothing," he said, trailing off. Her vigilant gaze made it impossible for him to admit he had been tempted to tease her further. The thought of hugging her, or even lifting her up like a playful child, briefly crossed his mind. But he knew better. Moments like this required restraint, and the setting wasn't right. Instead, he sat down obediently on the carpet beside the bed and patted the edge of it casually. Sense hesitated for a moment before finally sitting next to him. Her decision instantly brightened his mood. Smiling, he reached out and lightly touched her soft, flowing hair, enjoying the peaceful, warm moment so unlike the atmosphere at home. Not long after, Sense's mother arrived, carrying biscuits, desserts, and drinks. Ash didn't comment on why drinks were included, but he also didn't resist, settling into the unexpected hospitality. Lunch stretched into the afternoon as they spent hours discussing magic and sharing amusing stories about recent events. Despite the chilly northern weather, the room remained warm and comfortable. The atmosphere between the two gradually became relaxed and pleasant. Whenever their eyes met, Ash smiled in a brotherly way, which helped Sense relax further. Her initial tension faded completely, and she even seemed on the verge of dozing off at one point. By evening, after dinner, the two continued to enjoy the calm day by heading up to the terrace on the top floor. There, they drank tea and read books while overlooking the beautiful night view of the city. Countless magic stone lamps lit up across the city, their phosphorescent glow painting the dim streets in vibrant hues. Together, they formed a scene reminiscent of a galaxy, captivating enough to hold one's gaze for a long time. While Sense, accustomed to the sight, wasn't particularly moved, Ash quietly shifted his position closer to her. Taking the opportunity, he reached out to touch her hair again, earning a look of mild exasperation. As the warm glow of the setting sun cast a soft red tint over her cheeks, Sense's typically listless eyes seemed gentler than usual. Feeling the warmth of his hand resting on her head, with Ash smiling calmly beside her, she let her long hair sway slightly in the cool evening breeze. Something about the moment felt different, indescribably so. It was as though she were being treated like a child, yet for some reason, it didn't irritate her at all. In fact, it felt oddly nostalgic, almost as though it echoed how she had felt the very first time she had met him. Feeling a ripple disturb the stillness in her heart, Sense turned her gaze from the glowing city below to Ash. Narrowing her eyes, she spoke quietly. "Master Ash, you truly haven't changed, not from the beginning until now. Isn't that the same for you, Sense?" "I'm different from you. You smell like Lady Saria," he said teasingly. "Old people stink," she retorted flatly. Sense ignored his joke entirely. After a pause, she seemed to come to a decision and spoke, her tone quieter, yet steadier than before. "Perhaps, even if I die of old age, you will live on forever, just like Lady Saria." "Why would you think that? I've observed Lady Saria for a long time. She's not good at hiding her emotions, she always says what's on her mind." Though she hasn't said anything directly, I've had my suspicions. And you don't seem to be hiding it either. Am I right? Saria is such a troublesome person, Ash muttered, deflecting her observation without directly addressing it. Sen's wide eyes reflected her surprise at his candid reaction. You're not even going to deny it. I don't think you'd share this with anyone, Ash said calmly. As if by instinct, his palm found its place atop her head once more. Honestly, I'm a little surprised, Sen's admitted softly. It's not such an important secret, is it? Maybe not, but... Don't complicate things, he interrupted gently, shaking his head with a small smile. Without warning, he slid his hands under her arms and lifted her petite frame high into the air. Master Ash! Sen's exclaimed, startled. She flailed slightly, her expression flustered. Holding her up towards the starry sky, Ash met her gaze with a calm smile and said, no matter how much time passes, I'll always watch over you during your fleeting time here. Just because our lifespans differ doesn't mean the time we share isn't real. But even so, one day, you'll forget I ever existed, won't you? Her words hung in the air. The girl who had been struggling just moments ago now stilled, her wide eyes locked onto his, waiting for his response. Yet Ash couldn't bring himself to answer immediately. His gaze drifted, thoughts scattering as he recalled the dwarf guarding the village and the unchanging expressions of Saria and Frieren. Beings like them had a concept of time entirely different from humans. Centuries passed as though they were mere moments. Ash, on the other hand, still clung to his human perception of time, unable to truly comprehend what it meant to span millennia. He couldn't say for certain what kind of person he would be 1,000 years from now. Would this fleeting connection, this precious bond, eventually fade from his memory without him even realizing it? He couldn't deny the possibility. Sen's, noticing the distress clouding his expression, felt a pang of loneliness. She wouldn't admit it, but she couldn't ignore the ache that came with the thought. Ash caught the faint glimmer of loneliness in her eyes. Slowly, he lowered her back to the ground, placing her gently beside him. He bent his knees slightly so that their gazes were level and offered her a soft, apologetic smile. 1,000 years is too long for me to promise anything, he said gently. But for as long as I remain who I am now, I will remember you as my cherished junior sister, someone precious to me during this century. Chapter 134, Even if we can't live in the same time. 1,000 years is too long for me to promise anything, Ash said gently. But for as long as I remain who I am now, I will remember you as my cherished junior sister, someone precious to me during this century. I know that. Then it's all fine, isn't it? Ash gently stroked Sen's hair, but she removed his hand from her head. Looking at him intently, she softly asked. You're clearly the same as Lady Saria, but also different. Don't you feel lonely being so close to us? You know, a long time ago, someone said something similar to you, he replied, lowering his gaze in thought. After pondering for a while, he concluded, I think it was Fern's ancestor. Really? But, judging by your expression, it seems like you don't remember her much. I remember parts of it, Ash muttered in response. Then, with a confident smile, he cupped Sen's face and said. But it doesn't matter. I'll remember everything about Sen's, from beginning to end. You mean, my last time, don't you? Sen's voice faltered, her eyes lowering with a hint of loneliness. The conversation fell into a sudden silence. Neither was good at handling such topics. Even Ash, unsure of how to continue, hesitated before reflexively wanting to reach out and touch her hair. After what felt like an eternity, Sen's, who was usually the type to let silence linger, took the initiative to break it. I'm sorry. You've always been so kind to me during important moments, but I feel like I've been a bit too willful without realizing it. Not at all, Ash reassured her with a smile. If anything, the fact that you could take the initiative to say that shows how much you've grown. As he spoke, his gaze softened. With a playful squint, he pointed to the top of her head and mused, you know, I think you've grown a little taller since before. Maybe, just a little, Sen's replied, her voice vague but tinged with amusement. Their earlier somber conversation was quietly left behind, the warm and familiar atmosphere between them restored. The two spent the rest of the evening exchanging light-hearted conversations, laughter interweaving with the trivialities of daily life. When the stars finally filled the night sky, Ash reluctantly said his goodbyes. After all, he would never spend the night at a girl's house, especially with her elders present. Although, admittedly, the idea was somewhat tempting. As he walked away under the starry sky, Sense stood on the terrace, watching his figure fade into the distance, eventually disappearing into the boundless night. Her heart returned to its usual calmness, but as the silence around her deepened, it gave way to an inexplicable loneliness. It was like watching a meteor streak across the sky, beautiful yet fleeting, leaving behind an unshakable sense of emptiness. She found herself inexplicably fixated on the traces Ash had left behind, convinced that the warmth of his touch still lingered in her hair. Her hand unconsciously reached up, brushing the ends of her hair as if trying to confirm whether the warmth was real. Not far from Sense's home, Ash walked through the quiet streets, only to notice a figure leaning against the shadows of a building. It was Yubel, her hands behind her back, a sly smirk on her face. The mischievous gleam in her eyes was unmistakable. "So, I saw it," she teased as she stepped into view. "You weren't secretly plotting with Sense to cheat on something, were you? Do you really think I need to do something like that?" Ash replied dryly. Without hesitation, he slapped the top of her head lightly and pushed her aside as he strode past. "Hey, I was just kidding," Yubel called after him, laughing as she straightened up. "I'm just curious about what kind of relationship you two have." "Sense is my junior," Ash said flatly, his tone leaving no room for further comment. "When you came here, you seemed to have a really good relationship. Are you sure you're just juniors?" Yubel's face was brimming with curiosity as she quickly followed behind him. "I never said we were just juniors. After all, we've known each other for more than 10 years. "More than 10 years? You've been acquainted for that long? That's quite a while." "Well, by chance, our communication deepened over time. So, we're the best of juniors." Ash responded casually to the girl's relentless curiosity, explaining how his relationship with Sense had evolved, all the while walking toward home with Yubel trailing behind. Though, inwardly, he couldn't help but wonder what Yubel had been doing there all this time. Had she been squatting in the shadows all day? Knowing Yubel, it wasn't entirely out of the question. They continued their light conversation until they reached home, where Frieren and Fern were already sound asleep. Yubel, however, clearly wasn't ready to end the conversation. She followed Ash to his room, intent on prying further into his past. But before she could get another word in, Ash shut the door in her face, leaving her standing there with her nose inches from the wood. Alone at last, Ash lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Sense's words replayed in his mind, weighing heavily on him, keeping him from falling asleep. But it didn't matter. He had plenty of energy, so losing a night's rest wasn't a problem. Before dawn, he slipped out of the house, quietly avoiding Fern and Frieren. He wandered the city aimlessly, spending time in the park with a lost child, playing with them for a while before escorting them home. With the morning still stretching before him, he decided to visit the Magic Association. As he approached the stairs leading to the entrance, his gaze fell on the high platform outside the gate. There, leaning over the railing, was Kin, her orange twin ponytails catching the light, making her look like an energetic puppy. When their eyes met, Kin, looking inexplicably embarrassed, hesitated for a moment before raising her hand to wave at him. Ash climbed the steps and leaned against the railing beside her. Glancing at the girl, who now seemed slightly uneasy because of his presence, he broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" "Actually, I'm waiting for La Wine. After that, we're going to thank Frieren and then maybe hang out with Fern, or something." "Really? What a youthful plan. Make sure to get along well with each other," Ash replied with a chuckle, reaching out to tousle her hair. Kin didn't resist but flinched slightly as if the gesture tickled her. "I always feel like... Uncle, you're always like this. You just love touching people's hair." "Well, I can't exactly touch your belly in public, can I?" Ha! Startled by his inexplicably regretful remark, Kin shrank to the side, her face turning a deep shade of red. "I'm just saying, I wouldn't actually touch it. And honestly, the only place you can safely touch a girl is her head. Didn't I mention this before? Is there no option to just not touch anything? The sense of distance between people is like physical distance. I only touch the heads of people I want to get closer to. I feel like I get it, but I also don't." Accepting his explanation but still slightly wary, Kin stood beside him again, though she kept a cautious eye on him, as if afraid he might suddenly attempt to touch her belly. Ash chuckled at her guarded stance but said nothing. Instead, he patted her head gently and reached into his pocket, pulling out a piece of candy. Want one? He offered with a smile. Chapter 135, A Weird Pervert. Want one? Ash offered a candy with a smile. I'm not a child. Although Kin complained like this, she still took the candy and asked in confusion, why does uncle have candy on him? There was a child crying just now, so I bought some. It would have been a waste to throw away the extra ones, so I just kept them with me, Ash replied, his attention still fixed on the book in his hand. Really, you think I'm a child? Kin muttered in a slightly depressed tone, but she still peeled off the wrapper and put the candy in her mouth, letting the sweet taste spread across her tongue. Quietly leaning closer to him, she glanced at the book in his hand and asked curiously, Uncle, are you waiting for someone too? I don't have an appointment with anyone today, but it must be boring for you to wait here alone, right? So I'll keep you company for a while until Lawine shows up. Hey, Uncle is quite gentle, Kin teased. I've always said this, it's you who didn't believe it, Ash replied without much change in tone. Now I believe it, Kin said, a small smile unconsciously appearing on her face. The two leaned on the guardrail, chatting casually. Most of the time, Kin was busy complaining about Lawine, and Ash just listened quietly. She seemed genuinely happy as she talked, and he didn't interrupt her. Not long after, the familiar figure of Lawine appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Lawine, who had arranged to meet Kin in front of the Magic Association, froze when she saw Ash standing there next to her friend. Her expression darkened almost immediately. Why are you here too? She asked sharply, her tone making her irritation clear. Just accompanying Kin, Ash replied, raising his gaze briefly before looking back down at the book in his hand. Your attitude toward your elders is terrible, don't you think? Maybe try showing a little respect. I respect elders when they deserve respect, Lawine retorted coldly. While Lawine maintained a polite attitude with others, her tone toward Ash was always filled with hostility. At this point, Ash had stopped expecting her to change. He simply lowered his head and flipped another page in his book. This response only made Lawine angrier. She stomped loudly on the ground, moving closer to him, her irritation palpable. What? Shouldn't you say something in rebuttal when someone says that? She demanded, glaring at him. Trouble, forget it. I don't feel like arguing with you, Ash replied flatly without even looking up. You're so irritating. Lawine exclaimed, stamping her feet in frustration. Kin stepped forward, trying to defuse the tension with a wry smile. Come to think of it, you are cuter than usual, Lawine. This dress. Lawine muttered, tugging slightly at the hem of her skirt with a sulky expression. Unlike the blue gothic Lolita outfit she wore during the exam, she was now dressed in a pure white dress. The white dress was paired with a light blue short jacket, giving her a fresh and elegant appearance. A white sun hat with a flowing blue ribbon adorned her head, giving the impression of a gentle breeze on an early summer morning. Overall, she seemed more gentle and noble than before, like a proper young lady. However, her straightforward personality and boyish demeanor sharply contrasted with her refined appearance. I'm afraid that only by not speaking can she act like a young lady, Ash muttered after observing her for a moment. Did you say something? Lawine, with her sharp ears, caught his murmuring and immediately glared at him. Nothing, I just said it doesn't suit you, Ash replied nonchalantly. Do you think I wanted to wear this? Lawine retorted, clearly annoyed. My 3 brothers came back from the imperial capital with a bunch of weird clothes, and my mom got overly excited. She had the maids dress me up like this. That's great, miss, Ash teased with a smirk. Don't think I don't know you're someone important. My grandfather told me to treat you politely, and my eldest brother thinks it'd be good for me to get along with you, she added with a forced tone, clearly holding back her frustration. Ash wasn't fazed. Instead, he muttered to himself, the imperial capital? So your family still maintains ties with the empire. Didn't the kingdom annex the southern part of the empire during the Demon War? Of course, my family has relatives among the imperial nobility. It's not like the kingdom forbids it, right? Lawine said matter-of-factly. That's true, Ash admitted, then added, but I'd recommend that your brothers avoid visiting the empire again. What's that supposed to mean? Lawine's curiosity was piqued. Normally, she'd ignore such remarks, but Ash's mysterious background and the weight his words carried made her pause. It's just a suggestion based on the current situation, he said with a faint smile, not looking up from his book. Fine. I'll tell Grandpa when I get home, Lawine said bluntly. That's a good idea, Ash replied, glancing up briefly in mild surprise. Noticing his expression, Lawine frowned. What's with that weird pause and look? I just thought you wouldn't listen to me, he said honestly. Even though I dislike you, I'm not stupid. I know you're competent, Lawine admitted grudgingly. How about trying to flatter me a little? It might work to your advantage, Ash teased, a playful glint in his eyes. Tell me the benefits first, Lawine countered with a sly smile, extending her hand mockingly. Ash reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of candy, and placed it on the table. Lawine froze, her expression turning sour. What? Do you think I'm a child? Despite her complaint, she unwrapped the candy and popped it into her mouth. But she still couldn't resist a jab. For someone your age, carrying candy around is kind of childish, don't you think? It's not for me. I bought it to comfort a crying child earlier. The kid wouldn't stop bawling, Ash explained. Really? Lawine looked genuinely surprised for a moment. What's so surprising about that? I just thought you'd kick a crying child if you came across one, Lawine said flatly. Seriously, what kind of monster do you take me for? An uncle bastard, Lawine declared without hesitation, her tone as sharp as her words. Ash's face twisted into a subtle but unmistakable expression of disbelief. Kin chuckled nervously and stepped in to diffuse the tension. Well, uncle, are you getting used to Lawine's attitude yet? I'm managing, Ash replied with a shrug. But I'm still not used to a girl who dresses like a lady but talks so crudely. That said, it's unexpectedly interesting. Interesting? What's that supposed to mean? Lawine demanded, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Wait, are you some kind of pervert with weird interests? She instinctively stepped back, her hands defensively clutching her skirt, while Ash's troubled expression deepened. Chapter 136, It was a woman. Even though what Ash said might have been a bit strange, he couldn't help but feel slightly hurt by Lawine avoiding him so blatantly. Still, he hesitated for a moment and eventually chose to stay quiet. After all, denying or admitting anything at this point would lead to the same outcome, unnecessary misunderstandings that would only make things worse. It was better to say nothing and let the awkwardness dissipate naturally. Ha, ha ha. Kin let out a dry laugh, feeling caught in the middle of the odd dynamic between Lawine and Ash. Desperate to change the subject, she cheerfully suggested, speaking of which, we're almost ready to look for Fern and Frieren. Uncle, why don't you come home with us? No, no. I'm running away from home for a while. Don't mind me, Ash replied without hesitation. He had no intention of going back. But Kin wasn't about to let him off that easily. She grabbed his arm, playfully dragging him along as she teased, Uncle, you're already an adult. You shouldn't be running away from home like a kid. Lawine, who initially planned to ignore Ash, couldn't resist joining in when she saw how reluctant he was. With a half-smile of triumph, she followed Kin's lead, helping drag him along despite his protests. Dash. At first, Ash was strategizing about how to slip away unnoticed. However, his escape plans were derailed when they stopped to buy snacks as a thank you gift for Frieren. Right outside a bakery, he spotted two familiar figures selecting bread and desserts. Oh! Fern! We're here to play with you! Kin exclaimed, excitedly rushing forward to grab Fern's hand, shaking it with joy. Kin, why are you here? Lord Ash! Fern froze mid-sentence when her gaze shifted to Ash. He was standing at the door, partially covering his face as if plotting an escape. Fern's expression immediately became tense. Frieren also noticed him and walked over with her usual impassive expression. She looked up at him, her tone calm but pointed. Ash, do you have anything you want to explain? My chest muscles are bigger than yours. What can I say? Ash thought bitterly. Being forced to run away from home over such a minor incident felt ridiculous. The world is not worth it. Despite his inner grumbling, he knew better than to speak his thoughts aloud, especially in front of Frieren and Fern. If he dared, he was sure it would result in his immediate demise. With a resigned sigh, he bowed his head and apologized. Although it wasn't intentional, the fact is, I saw something I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. What exactly did you see that you shouldn't have? Frieren's tone was deceptively mild, but her words carried an edge. She grabbed his collar and raised an eyebrow in obvious displeasure. What do you think about a girl's innocence, Ash? Girl. Ash started but immediately hesitated. Do you have any comments? Frieren's expression grew more menacing. No, he replied quickly, turning his head to avoid her piercing gaze. She's technically a 1,000-year-old woman, but judging by her appearance, she still qualifies as a young girl, right? Ash thought to himself. But he wisely kept the comment to himself, worried that calling her old would result in her crying non-stop for 3 days and 3 nights. Kin, sensing the tension, cautiously asked, what happened here? It's nothing, Ash replied with a strained smile, patting Kin on the shoulder. Just the usual quarrel between Frieren and Fern. But as Ash tried to lighten the mood, he instinctively reached out to touch Frieren's hair. As expected, she immediately slapped his hand away and issued her usual warning, her glare daring him to try again. At this moment, Fern leaned closer, standing on tiptoe to bring her face as close to Ash's as possible. Master Ash, please tell me honestly, where did you go yesterday? A friend's house, he replied curtly. A friend? What friend? Fern pressed, her tone growing sharper. It's fine, their parents were at home, Ash added, as if this explanation clarified everything. That means it was a woman? Fern asked, her sharp tone cutting through his composure. Why are you so sharp at moments like this? Ash muttered, visibly uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Fern, who usually appeared a little dull, was surprisingly perceptive now. He glanced at Kin for some support, but Kin's curiosity only deepened. Uncle, do you actually have other friends? She asked, tilting her head inquisitively. Someone from the Magic Association. Fern speculated further. Frieren, seemingly intrigued, touched her chin thoughtfully and tentatively said, Saria doesn't seem likely, could it be sense? Ash froze for a moment. Oh, this cookie looks good. La wine, could you buy me some? He deflected, picking up a cookie and pretending to be deeply interested in it. His eyes shifted to La wine, who had been silent while selecting a thank you gift. La wine, however, had been eavesdropping the entire time. She shot him a glare and said with clear displeasure, You're such a disrespectful uncle. Are you seriously dodging the question right now? You're so long-winded. Stop talking about me, Ash retorted dismissively. Hey? You were the one who spoke to me first, weren't you? La wine's temper flared almost instantly. Despite her ladylike dress, she rolled up her sleeves, ready to fight. Ash, however, brushed her off casually and walked out of the store as if nothing had happened, completely ignoring her rising anger. La wine stood there fuming, left with no outlet for her frustration. Seeing his nonchalant attitude, the others realized pressing him further would be futile. The conversation had already reached its conclusion, there was no need to ask any more. Although Ash tried to slip away, Fern firmly grabbed his sleeve and dragged him back home with them. In Fern's room, Kin and La Wine brought in a basket of cookies and assorted desserts to share with Frieren. The girls gathered on the soft bed, their laughter and chatter mixing with the crisp crunch of biscuits and the soothing aroma of black tea, creating a cozy, harmonious atmosphere. Ash, however, seemed to exist in a world apart. He sat quietly at the desk, the soft rustling of turning pages contrasting sharply with the lively noise around him. He focused intently on his book, attempting to immerse himself in its contents and keep his heart calm, undisturbed by the joy that surrounded him. As the cheerful conversation carried on, Kin's gaze drifted toward Ash's focused figure. Unable to suppress her curiosity, she asked, Does the uncle always work this hard? At a time like this, most people would join us in chatting, right? Maybe he's just showing off in front of the girls, La Wine said with a sly grin, her tone teasing. All those childish boys at the academy act like that. What's more, there are 4 beautiful girls here. She puffed out her chest confidently as she spoke, clearly amused. But... oh. Ash barely looked up, giving them a brief glance before letting out a faint, dismissive scoff. Without a word, he returned his attention to the book, completely unfazed by their chatter. His calm and focused demeanor felt almost disdainful, as though he viewed their conversation as beneath him. His subtle dismissal made the 4 of them feel oddly belittled. It was as though Ash regarded them with a detached superiority, seeing them as mere children whose antics weren't worth his attention. Chapter 137, The Second Round of Exams. Ruins of the King's Tomb. Although I admit I provoked Ash on purpose, and he isn't that kind of person, his attitude, it's just infuriating. Lawine fumed, rolling up her sleeves and slightly lifting her skirt as though ready to pick a fight with Ash again. You don't really mean that? Fern, who had been about to speak on Ash's behalf, hesitated, her emotions mixed after hearing Lawine's outburst. She had initially planned to defend Ash with a few kind words. However, Lawine's frustration didn't seem to stem from past grievances, but rather a personality clash or perhaps something more complicated, like an emotional entanglement. Is this what Ash meant when he mentioned Sundara? Frieren commented, refraining from her usual Frieren at Ash, instead observing Lawine with curiosity. Sundara? What's that supposed to mean? Lawine asked, frowning in confusion. She didn't understand the term, but something about it made her feel it wasn't a compliment. After all, she simply didn't get along with Ash, but she acknowledged his skills. There wasn't a deeper conflict, was there? Lawine pondered the idea briefly before shaking it off. She had no time to worry about such things because before she could vent her frustration at Ash, a blue bird from the Magic Association swooped in through the open window. With a sharp cry, the bird dropped a scroll onto the table. The rolled-up paper unfurled to reveal the details for the second round of exams: the time, location, and the name of the examiner. Dash. The sudden arrival of the blue bird disrupted the warm, light-hearted atmosphere in the room. The tension deepened as soon as they saw the examiner's name. Sense? Just our luck, Lawine groaned, clutching her head as though the name alone gave her a headache. Even Can's cheerful demeanor dimmed as she muttered, "It's hard enough passing the first round." Her dejected tone was almost pitiable, and if they had been alone, Ash might have teased her. But with everyone present, he chose to remain quiet. Noticing their expressions, Fern asked with concern, "What's wrong?" Sense has handled 4 previous exams, and no one passed any of them, Lawine explained, her bitterness evident. She turned to Ash with a pleading look. "I heard you're close with her. Can't you ask her to go easy on us this time?" "I respect Sense's decisions," Ash replied simply. "But the meeting point is the ruins of the king's tomb. The exam will definitely take place inside," Lawine persisted. "My brother went there before. The water mirror demon is said to lurk in the depths. It can create perfect copies of its opponents. Even you would have to fight yourself. Are you really confident you can handle that? What are you even worried about?" Ash shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "There's no such thing as perfect magic, and nothing in this world is absolute," he explained calmly. "Take the mercenary magician from the first round as an example. His suppression magic could limit magic power, but even that had its limits, right? Every type of magic has boundaries. But what if you aren't the boundary? How can you be so sure it has a limit at all?" Lawine countered, her skepticism clear. "Because it's still a living creature, not a god," Ash replied confidently. "If the water mirror demon could truly create flawless copies, it would already have been deployed to deal with the Demon King, or the demons would have used it to confront the goddess." Even though Ash's reasoning seemed sound, it was clear that not everyone was entirely convinced. After all, as far as Lawine knew, no one had ever successfully conquered the king's tomb. It was said that no one had reached the limits of the mythical era creature known as the Crystal Demon. Ash sighed, shaking his head at their doubts. "Think about it," he said. "It was imprisoned as a gravekeeper at the bottom of the king's tomb. Do you think it volunteered for the job? If its replicas were truly flawless, why would it have been confined there?" Come to think of it," Lawine murmured, her brow furrowing, "isn't the king's tomb an underground royal mausoleum built during the period of Great Unification?" It wasn't until Ash's reminder that the pieces began to click. She frowned, mulling it over. If the monster's replicas were truly without fault, it wouldn't need to be confined to guard the tomb. The royal mausoleum had been meticulously constructed, it was far more likely that the creature had been imprisoned there after it was built. Realizing this, she turned to Ash with a look of surprise. "Uncle, you're unexpectedly smart." "That shouldn't be unexpected," Ash replied with a scoff. "And if you're going to compliment me, at least do it properly." Lawine crossed her arms, a slight pout on her lips. "No, I just feel like I've lost somehow. Kids these days." Ash shook his head dramatically before flipping open the book he had been reading earlier, clearly uninterested in arguing further. Meanwhile, the others began discussing strategies for conquering the king's tomb. Their low voices were filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination as they tried to prepare for the challenge ahead. The day of the exam. The morning of the exam arrived, and Sense stood waiting at the entrance of the imposing royal tomb. Her small figure was dwarfed by the grandeur of the structure around her. The 4 massive entrances to the tomb were flanked by towering stone statues, each standing over 20 meters tall. The central figure depicted an old man holding a scepter, crowned regally, a clear representation of the tomb's deceased king. As Ash approached, he couldn't help but feel amused at the sight of Sense standing alone amidst such grandeur. For a brief moment, he considered ruffling her hair in greeting, but he refrained, remembering the situation. Instead, he simply walked up and greeted her casually. Sense lowered her head slightly, guilt evident in her demeanor. In a quiet voice meant only for him, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Master Ash. I already reported the exam details to Master Saria. When she found out you were participating, she refused to allow any changes to the content." Ash chuckled softly, brushing off her concern with a wave of his hand. "That's exactly what Saria would do. Don't worry about it. I'll manage." His easygoing demeanor seemed to calm her nerves, and she exhaled, relieved. Turning to face the gathered examinees, Sense took a deep breath and raised her voice. "The second round of the exam is to conquer the ruins of the king's tomb," she announced. "The only condition for passing is to reach the deepest part of the tomb. As you all know, I am a pacifist and dislike unnecessary conflict, so reaching the bottom is all you need to do to succeed." Her words drew a murmur from the crowd, their unease evident despite her attempts at reassurance. Sense continued, carefully explaining the time limit. Participants had until dawn the next day to complete the task. As she elaborated further, she began distributing small glass bottles containing tiny golems to each participant, briefly explaining their purpose. Chapter 138. Sense distributed the bottles in a businesslike manner, giving each of the little golems one and informing them that they were experimental escape golems developed by the first-class magician Lernan. As long as the bottle was broken, the golem would automatically expand to protect them and take them away from danger. After all, they were all magicians, and if they had the protection of a warrior-type golem, their survival rate would be much higher. Is this something new made by Lernan? The magic Lernan was best at was golem magic, and he devoted his entire life to this kind of magic. Ash knew a little about this, but he just looked at it curiously and put it in his pocket. Without waiting for everyone's reaction, he walked past Sense, who was still answering everyone's questions, and quickly stepped into the dungeon. This scene surprised everyone, especially Fern and the others, who knew something about the king's tomb because of Lawine. "Master Ash." Fern subconsciously wanted to chase after him and dissuade him from his actions. But Frieren raised her hand to stop her, and when Fern looked back in surprise, she slowly shook her head. "That guy must be going to get rid of himself. There is no point in you going." "How could it be? At least, the difference in magic power is too great. If he uses all his strength, he can deflect your magic with the overflowing magic power alone. To be honest, I have only seen such a situation in the previous Demon King and Saria." Frieren tried hard to pick out objects that could be compared and ignored the astonishment of her companions, continuing, "Although Ash is not at their level, it is far beyond your limit. It is still very easy to deflect and offset ordinary magic, just like I told you. If we encounter a large demon, we must flee without hesitation. I have no chance of winning now, right? Yeah, and ordinary demons are not as exaggerated as Ash." Looking at the back that disappeared into the darkness, Frieren couldn't help but sigh softly. "Why are you working so hard? The Demon King has been defeated. Are you trying to deal with the mastermind who is hiding somewhere? Is the uncle so powerful?" Kin, who had been listening quietly on the side, couldn't help but ask. Lawine looked at the disappearing figure and couldn't help but mutter, "I know he's amazing, but is this person so gentle?" It's hard to say how gentle he is, but Ash has always had a strong sense of responsibility. He's really not a bad person. In fact, Frieren, who still hoped that the relationship between Lawine and Ash could be normalized, spoke for him with a smile but added in a low voice at the end, "Although he may have done some bad things. Do you believe him or not?" Lawine was at a loss whether to laugh or cry when she heard this. "At least I believe he will be fine. As a person, he is definitely trustworthy in big matters, at least that's what I think." "Really? Well, there have been some changes, but..." Because at this point, if she frankly admitted the situation, she would feel like she was losing, which made Lawine a little irritated. Therefore, after wanting to say something but hesitating, she finally chose to say nothing. A group of people gathered in twos and threes and began to discuss the strategy for conquering the king's tomb, but most of them planned to wait for a while. Even if they didn't know the situation of the king's tomb, it would always be good for someone to explore the way first. After all, the goal was just to reach the deepest point, so it doesn't matter if it's a little late, right? Sense, the examiner, kept her gaze fixed on the intersection with an expressionless face, leaving it unclear whether she was worried or simply indifferent. In the end, she chose to trust Saria's judgment and didn't linger for long. As people began entering the king's tomb in small groups, she decided to follow Frieren. After all, aside from Ash, this legendary magician who had once defeated the Demon King seemed trustworthy enough. On the other side, inside the king's tomb, the faint light of magic stone lamps and candles lit by someone unknown provided a dim glow in the dark and damp underground tomb. The air carried a musty smell and a cold, oppressive underground chill. The space was vast yet suffocatingly enclosed. Each step echoed endlessly, the sound bouncing off the tomb's silent walls. At first, only a few gargoyles appeared. They were simple to handle. Struck them before they could transform from stone statues into monsters. They shattered into pieces, and the problem was resolved with little effort. But Ash, after wandering carelessly for about an hour. What? Lawine and Kin. Ahead, two familiar figures appeared. They looked just like the girls he knew, but their bodies were entirely made of stone. Although they appeared to be crafted from stone, the replicas were intricately detailed, so vivid and lifelike that apart from the color, they were nearly indistinguishable from the real Lawine and Kin. The two stone clones didn't speak, likely because they lacked the ability to do so. Kin raised her hand in silence, releasing a beam of ordinary attack magic. At the same time, several large ice cones materialized beside Lawine. However, there was no one else nearby. Ash didn't bother to use defensive magic. The immense magical power he had stopped suppressing directly interfered with the surrounding magic. The attacks distorted and dissipated upon contact with his presence. The light beam and ice cones lost all effect in an instant, and Ash continued walking forward casually. With a simple gesture of his hand, the two clones were cleanly bisected before they could even register the attack. As the shattered stone figures fell to the ground, he paid them no further attention and moved toward the deeper parts of the tomb as if nothing had happened. As he continued, more clones emerged from the depths, their strengths gradually increasing from weak to formidable. The stronger the individual being replicated, the longer the process seemed to take. Ash, however, was too uninterested to bother. Each time he encountered one, he either moved past it at high speed or simply ignored it altogether. Finally, he reached the deepest chamber. In the last hall, numerous figures awaited him. Among them were Ken and Lawine, the two he had recently eliminated, who had somehow appeared once more. They can actually be resurrected. How interesting! He smirked as he regarded the replicas standing before him. The floor tiles of the hall were adorned with designs reminiscent of an ancient sun, and three particularly notable clones, those of himself, Frieren, and Sense, stood at the forefront. Of course, while the term many seemed appropriate, the number of people wasn't overwhelming. Apart from these three, only Denkin and Fern stood to the side, seemingly acting as supporters. Excluding the resurrected Lawine and Kin, the remaining figures were clearly the most capable participants in the second exam. Well, it's been a long time since I've had a challenge. Let's see how this goes. Ash grinned as his body began to transform. Already tall, his height increased steadily. His entire frame expanded proportionally, every part of his body growing in harmony. Bathed in a nourishing dark purple light, he swelled to an imposing height of about 2 meters. Chapter 139, Ash vs. Two devil-like horns sprouted from Ash's forehead, further increasing his already towering height. The once loose clothes now stretched tightly against his growing body, bulging with the strain of his transformation. A circular wave of air erupted from him, scattering dust across the ground in all directions. The overwhelming magic power, capable of sweeping away everything and instilling despair, was now fully unleashed. The space around him seemed to twist and distort, pulsating with abnormal fluctuations. A terrifying magical storm filled the vast chamber. Though the storm was restrained, its sheer intensity caused the entire dungeon to tremble slightly. All the magicians who had entered the dungeon felt an involuntary shiver run down their spines. Even without directly sensing the binding magic emanating from the depths, they instinctively knew that something monstrous had awakened below. The moment Ash released his power, all the replicas in front of him simultaneously raised their hands, unleashing beams of magical light. At the same time, Ash, along with his own clone, stepped forward and stomped on the ground. Boom! The roar of purple gravity thunder echoed throughout the chamber. The ground, fortified with defensive magic, cracked and sank under the force of the impact, and the entire dungeon shook violently. The arcs of purple lightning spread across the floor like serpents, causing the gravity in the chamber to increase exponentially. Within this crushing field, Fern and Denkin were pinned to the ground, their magic interrupted mid-cast. Without the resistance of their magic power, they would have been instantly crushed into fragments like brittle tiles. Lawine and Kin, reacting a moment too late, weren't as fortunate. They were crushed into pulp and died once again. However, 3 individuals near Ash managed to preserve a small area around themselves, resisting the crushing gravity and thunderstorm with considerable effort. The next moment, Sense's hair transformed into electrified drills, launching themselves toward Ash from every direction with tremendous force. Frieren's wand glowed with a mixture of white and purple lightning as she cast the Thunder of Destruction, a spell that served as the prototype for Ash's gravity thunder. Meanwhile, Ash's replica, still in human form, unsheathed a blade and transformed into a blur of motion, appearing instantly in front of him. The coordination among the 3 replicas was unexpectedly seamless, creating a formidable attack, but Ash smirked. As expected, there's a limit to what can be replicated. You're all too slow. Ash, fully aware of his own abilities, wasted no time. He reached out, grabbed the head of his clone, and smashed it into the ground with overwhelming force. Bang! The impact echoed loudly as the clone's head shattered, leaving a deep crater in the magically reinforced ground. The surrounding floor compacted further under the weight of Ash's gravity magic. But just as the clone was destroyed, the Thunder of Destruction and the electrified drills collided with Ash's body. However, with his magic power unleashed, ordinary spells had no effect on him. The high-density magical aura surrounding him formed an unyielding barrier, akin to an iron wall, capable of repelling even the most intense attacks. The roaring thunder of destruction and the spiraling electric drills failed to penetrate, stopping just short of his body. But these were no ordinary spells, and Ash quickly noticed their unique strength as they began to chip away at his magical defenses bit by bit, surprising him. At that moment, his pinned clone suddenly unleashed a powerful repulsive force. The ground trembled and buckled, breaking apart violently as Ash was forced to step back 2 paces. The clone quickly raised its hand, summoning invisible claws that tore through the ground as it lunged toward him. Ash, however, stood firm. With a casual wave of his hand, he released an even more devastating impact, sending the clone hurtling backward with overwhelming force. The large amount of rubble scattered around him began to gather in midair, compressing into rock-like spheres. These spheres were so densely packed that it was no longer accurate to call them mere rocks. They had become something far more solid and lethal. As the highly dense shells formed, the clone activated defensive magic, blocking the tearing impact that Ash's wave had unleashed. Simultaneously, dozens of purple light spheres, each larger in diameter than a human, materialized around the clone. These spheres radiated an intense, lethal magic before they shot toward Ash with terrifying speed. Ash remained motionless. The overwhelming magic power surrounding him easily counteracted the barrage. However, Sense's hair had already transformed into a massive scythe, brimming with destructive energy. At the same time, the tip of Frieren's wand, combined with the clone's immense killing magic, formed an enormous magic circle with a diameter exceeding 10 meters. From this circle, a colossal black beam of light surged forth, resembling a flood breaking free from a dam. The convergence of various energies created an unrelenting cascade of shockwaves. Each wave was powerful enough to lift the broken bricks and stones scattered across the ground. Even the defensive barrier in front of Ash began to show signs of strain, gradually weakening under the onslaught. At that exact moment, the massive scythe made of hair completed its energy buildup. As if seizing the perfect opportunity, it sliced through the air, radiating a strange and ominous black light. Faced with the combined magic, Ash relied solely on his overflowing magical power to withstand the relentless onslaught. Amid the swirling torrent of energy and the billowing smoke and dust, he calmly raised his hand and caught the giant hair sickle, a construct of countless intertwined spells. However, the sickle displayed an unnaturally exaggerated flexibility, its center suddenly caved inward, avoiding his grasp. While the magical barrier in front of him weakened under the continuous attacks, Fern, from a distance, unleashed a compressed magic strike that hit Ash squarely in the face without warning. The giant sickle followed immediately, slashing toward his head with the intent to cleave it in two. Amid the constantly interweaving light of the battlefield, Ash's seemingly impenetrable iron wall of magic finally gave way. Bang! The delayed sound of a powerful impact echoed through the chamber as the sickle managed to tear through his skin, causing blood to splatter. Under the bombardment of these highly charged magical attacks, Ash's figure was pushed back dozens of meters across the ground, leaving a trail in his wake. A shallow but unmistakable cut appeared on his cheek, with red blood trickling down. It was a rare sight. Apart from injuries inflicted by those eccentric masters during his training, no one had managed to harm him in the past century, regardless of how many opponents had tried. This was the first time, since transforming into a demon nearly a century ago, that he had been bloodied, though it was merely a breach of his passive defense, a barrier constructed casually from his excess magic power. However, just as the iron wall of magic briefly shattered, Ash immediately activated several layers of defensive magic around him. He wiped the blood from his cheek with his fingertips, letting out a slight sigh before raising his hand and hurling several compressed rock balls at his enemies with devastating precision. At that moment, his own clone suddenly shattered the ground beneath its feet, sending fragments of stone flying as it lunged forward with alarming speed. With swift, precise movements, the clone's blade sliced through the supersonic rock balls, cutting them into pieces one by one. The other replicas followed suit, attempting to gather energy and unleash their own spells. But Ash, no longer playing defensively, finally launched a true counterattack. His blade scraped across the rocky ground, leaving behind a trail of explosive sparks. Yet, before the fiery sparks could catch up, Ash's figure broke through the sound barrier, arriving directly in front of Frieren. With a single, instantaneous slash, he severed the defenses created by Sense's hair, along with multiple layers of protective magic. "You're too meticulous as a magician." Ash's voice was cold as he watched Frieren, whose legs left the ground as she was flung backward at high speed, unable to avoid the strike. Her body was sliced cleanly in half, her fragile form no match for his blade. Yet, even as her body split, Frieren stared back at him coldly, her expression unwavering. Without hesitation, she rushed toward him again, her eyes wide with determination. But Ash remained unmoved. "This level of attack might trouble ordinary magicians," he said disdainfully. "But using it against me, what were you thinking?" Even as the force of the attack scattered bricks and debris in every direction, Ash stood firm, completely unaffected. The shockwave caused by the impact sent a strong wind billowing around him, making his clothes flutter noisily. Still, he simply raised his hand, gazing at Frieren's bisected body as it flew backward. Clenching his palm tightly in the air, he declared coldly, "No more playing. Disappear." Chapter 140, Artificial Black Hole. Under normal circumstances, a magician's magic power inherently protects their body, making it nearly impossible for external magic to affect vital functions, such as controlling the blood within them. Only those with extraordinary imagination or immense skill could bypass such defenses. However, at this moment, Ash's imaginary magic power, with its extraordinary precision, successfully pierced through the protective magic enveloping the cloned body of the young lady. As Frieren clenched her fist, an abnormal and overwhelming gravitational force twisted the clone's body unnaturally. In an instant, the two halves of the girl's form were crushed and compressed, reducing her to a tightly compacted ball of flesh. Throughout this horrifying process, Frieren relinquished her cloned magical body, choosing not to resist with her own magic. Instead, she calmly embraced the inevitability of death. In her final moments, she channeled all of her remaining magic into the wand she held in her hand. As her body disintegrated and death claimed her, the discarded wand began to glow, radiating an intense and ominous light. "A desperate attack," Ash murmured, narrowing his eyes. He caught the attacking hair mid-air, pulling it forward and smashing it into his approaching replica with incredible force. But just as this series of actions concluded, the ground beneath his feet collapsed, and the glowing wand erupted in a brilliant explosion, releasing an unimaginably intense light. In an instant, the hall, fortified with powerful magical defenses yet already on the verge of collapse, was utterly engulfed. Even Ash's reconstructed iron wall of magic, designed to shield his body, was instantly expelled. "What kind of magic is this? How have I never encountered it before?" Ash's eyes widened slightly, his surprise evident. The sudden dispelling of his defenses left him momentarily taken aback, realizing that this opponent had concealed a devastating trump card. Although the disruptive force of the wand's explosion was brief, it was enough to create an opportunity, a fleeting window that every magician present, world-class as they were, instantly recognized. The sacrifice of Frieren's replica had bought a single, priceless moment for all the magicians to strike, even if it meant risking their own lives. Seizing the chance, they unleashed their ultimate attacks in unison. A storm of fire, gravitational thunder, and high-energy magical blasts concentrated into spears of hair now imbued with power so immense they no longer resembled hair all hurtled toward Ash simultaneously. Dash! In the trembling, chaotic space, as the combined attacks closed in like streaking beams of light, Ash moved swiftly. Utilizing the opportunity created by Frieren's sacrifice, he launched his own magical counterattack. Between his hands, as his opponents concentrated on their seemingly fatal assault, a singularity began to form, a gravitational point so dense it resembled a black hole. With a casual flick, he released the black hole, and the tide of battle shifted in an instant. The light began to twist and warp as if dragged by an invisible force. A dark vortex formed at the black hole's center, pulling in everything around it. The moment the black hole fully manifested, it disrupted the gravitational field across the entire chamber. It was as if the end of the world had arrived, with the underground space twisting and warping under its influence. Everything in the vicinity was drawn into the black hole almost instantaneously. The first thing affected was the sound itself. Distorted by the black hole's overwhelming pull, the ambient noise turned into an ear-piercing shriek. Even that sound, however, was sucked in, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Bricks, stones, magical constructs, and even the walls and ceilings of the underground hall were peeled away layer by layer, collapsing into the void. Nothing could resist the black hole's inexorable suction. From the smallest dust particles to massive rock walls, everything in the underground chamber was stretched, compressed, and grotesquely deformed under the immense gravity of the black hole. Even the supporting structures of the underground space disintegrated the moment they touched the black hole's edge, as if caught in an invisible crusher that ground them to dust before erasing them completely from existence. However, the objects weren't merely swallowed. During their destruction, they emitted an eerie, fleeting light, reminiscent of the final shine of a dying star, brief, poignant, and hauntingly beautiful. All the surrounding building materials were drawn in, creating a calamity far worse than any natural disaster. Fern, who had exhausted all her magic power and anchored her wand into the ground in an attempt to stabilize herself, was unable to resist the pull. She was dragged helplessly into the artificial black hole, vanishing into its void. Sensa's hair was caught as well, but she reacted swiftly, severing her long strands in an instant. The loose hair burrowed deep underground, anchoring itself in a section of compacted rock reinforced with magical defenses. It writhed and rooted like a spider clinging desperately to its web, resisting the black hole's relentless suction. Denkin, using his magic to control the earth and lift the ground beneath him, managed to hold on briefly. But within 2 seconds, the powerful pull overwhelmed him. He, along with the rock wall he had raised, was drawn into the black hole, disappearing in an instant. Sensa's clone also succumbed to the suction. Despite struggling desperately, it was pulled into the air, its hair peeling away and scattering to the ground in clumps. From a distance, it resembled a massive spider caught in the chaos of a violent storm. Meanwhile, Ash's own clone used gravity magic to counter the pull, managing to resist the black hole for longer. But neither clone nor magician was spared the barrage of flying debris. As the earth was stripped away and rocks hurtled through the air at high speeds, they battered both Ash and his clone relentlessly. Then, just as Sense was about to be fully stripped and drawn into the void, the black hole suddenly subsided, or rather, Ash himself dispelled it with a casual wave of his hand. In the aftermath, the entire underground hall appeared as though it had undergone a cataclysmic rebirth. The once intricate and fortified space was stripped bare, reduced to its most primal state, with only exposed rock remaining. "What a remarkable feat," Ash muttered, landing lightly on the ground. He nudged a loose rock with the tip of his boot, his face filled with admiration. Under normal circumstances, the entire dungeon should have been consumed. Yet, when the ancient empire constructed it, they had painstakingly reinforced the external key traps and the deepest sections countless times. These fortifications made the structure extraordinarily resistant to magic. It was precisely because of this magical reinforcement that the dungeon remained intact. Otherwise, even a water mirror demon wouldn't have been enough to protect it. Countless magicians with mastery over earth magic could have easily bypassed the defenses by tunneling deep into the ground to defeat the demon directly. But such a feat was impossible. The deepest section of the dungeon was an enormous area, and attempting to breach it with magic was nothing short of a pipe dream. The effort to construct this place must have required an unimaginable amount of manpower and resources. Even an empire of today couldn't replicate such a feat. Not even Ash, with all his power, could bring himself to completely destroy this ancient treasure. "You understand, don't you?" he said, his tone calm and devoid of tension or urgency. Even the hostility and malice that had lingered earlier seemed to have thinned. Ash sighed softly, gazing up at his own clone. "To destroy this?" But before he could finish, the clone acted. Without hesitation, it drew its sword and charged at him again. The silent slash tore through the air, breaking the sound barrier as it hurtled toward Ash with deadly precision. Chapter 141, Magic Nullifying Crystal. The speeding sword carried a ferocious destructive power beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Even the figure of the one wielding it had long surpassed the limits of what the naked eye could perceive. It was like a whisper of death, enveloped in a suffocating sense of oppression, but the target is wrong. The replica's slashing blows, executed with incredible precision and speed, poured down like torrential rain. Yet, Ash relied entirely on intuition and instinct. With a mere raise of his hand, he expertly deflected each strike, weakening the force behind the replica's sword with every collision. Each clash resounded with the loud clang of metal and bursts of sparks, creating a spectacle akin to an intricate martial arts performance, mesmerizing, yet deadly. Sensa's hair, attempting to intervene, was rendered completely ineffective. The replica faced continuous defeats in the clash, and the stalemate between the two didn't last long. Amidst the swirling sparks, a silver flash split the air, striking fiercely against the replica's blade held horizontally to guard its forehead. "Just be honest, die," Ash murmured. The two lightning-coated blades ground against each other violently, but with Ash's whispered command, the contest ended. Boom! A thunderous roar, like the collision of meteorites, echoed through the dungeon. Ash's blade unleashed an unparalleled force, instantly overpowering the replica that still struggled to resist. The replica's blade shattered in two, along with its body, as lightning arced violently. The split extended from the top of the replica's head to the ground, tearing the earth along the blade's shining trajectory. The entire dungeon trembled violently, and the mountain range above fractured in the middle. The immense force of the strike split the dungeon itself deep into its core, leaving behind a massive, jagged crack. Looking upward, if one's vision could transcend the limits of ordinary sight, a faint ray of sunlight could be glimpsed thousands of meters above. Even the water mirror demon, lurking deeper within the cave, narrowly avoided being cut in half by Ash's strike. Yet Ash chose not to destroy it. Instead, he immediately sealed the demon, rendering it incapable of attacking further. With the water mirror demon neutralized, Ash prepared to leave the dungeon's deepest lair. As he passed by Sensa's replica, he refrained from destroying it. Instead, he merely patted its head lightly. After all, the assessment still needed to proceed. While Ash could easily pass the test, recklessness could spell disaster in the third round if the candidates weren't adequately challenged. However, his seal on the water mirror demon effectively ended its ability to generate further clones. Without this measure, the demon could potentially create another copy of Ash or Frieren, which would pose a significant challenge for the candidates. He had also noticed several other exits leading from the dungeon's deepest space. Once the clones were destroyed, it was likely that new ones would emerge to target other invaders. Though aware of this, Ash had no intention of intervening. His own clone had clearly been the last to be created, and the water mirror demon wouldn't be able to generate another so quickly. This ensured that no significant variables would affect the ongoing examination. Meanwhile, as Ash was battling the primary clones, the torrent of magic power and the occasional deafening roars sent tremors throughout the dungeon. Even those in subsequent teams, far from the source of the commotion, felt the tremors reverberate. The roars, though emanating from thousands of meters away, echoed through the king's tomb like distant, hoarse shouts, breaking its solemn silence. The unsettling sensations surging from deep underground left the other candidates gripped by an indescribable unease, as though the tomb itself was trembling in anticipation of something far greater. It was as if something had dragged despair from the deepest recesses of their souls, leaving their legs trembling with fear and their bodies weak and unsteady. If they hadn't known they were allies and that the competition forbade them from attacking one another, most of them would have fled without hesitation. When Ash, unaware of the chaos he had caused, emerged from the deepest part of the dungeon and reverted to his original form, he shook his head and sighed deeply as he walked. How did it end up like this? Although he had achieved his goal, the situation had clearly gotten out of hand. This result was completely contrary to his original intentions. He had wanted to enjoy himself, to see what it would feel like to be besieged by everyone else. The plan had been to let them fully display their abilities, but without realizing it, he had acted too quickly and eliminated too many people. The battle had ended too soon, leaving him feeling bored. I should have stretched it out longer. But it's no fun fighting puppets endlessly. Let's see how everyone else is holding up. Shrugging off his mild regret, Ash moved quickly through the underground city. While Ash had dealt with the biggest threat, the massive vibrations and torrents of magical energy he unleashed had unintended consequences. The commotion awakened various monsters hidden deep within the tomb and reactivated countless mechanisms long thought dormant. 1,000 years had passed, enough time for many traps to fail and for countless creatures to enter deep hibernation. But Ash's immense magical outburst had dislodged dust that clogged ancient mechanisms and jarred decayed components back into motion. What had been inert traps and slumbering beasts were now fully reawakened. As he walked through the dark tunnel, Ash could clearly hear the wails of monsters, the grinding of reactivated mechanisms, and the distant sounds of chaos echoing all around him. Even after running a short distance, the ground ahead began to tremble with small but rapid vibrations. Using his magical senses, Ash quickly located Fern and the others nearby. His instincts led him to glance upward toward the top of the sloping tunnel they were running through. And then, he saw it. A massive cylindrical crystal, perfectly shaped and blocking the entire passage, was rolling down from above with terrifying speed. Fern, Frieren, and Sense were sprinting for their lives ahead of it, their faces twisted into a mix of terror and almost comical desperation. Is that a magic nullifying crystal? From a distance, Ash could already feel the suppression of his own magic power, confirming the stone's nature. He recognized the enormous blue crystal immediately. This massive magic nullifying crystal was an extremely rare treasure. A piece the size of a fist could buy a mansion, but this crystal several meters in size was valuable enough to build a castle. It also carried an immense power to suppress magic within a considerable range. As pure magicians, Fern, Frieren, and Sense were utterly powerless against it. They couldn't even fly to escape and were forced to run for their lives. Run faster! Frieren, who was usually the one to stir up trouble under the guise of exercise and often left Fern behind, was now at the head of the fleeing group. As she dashed past Ash with an uncharacteristically panicked expression, she still found the time to shout a quick warning to him. Chapter 142, Ash being willful again. Fern, the tallest of the three and well accustomed to running away, held her wand with a terrified expression, shaking her head nervously. Meanwhile, Sense, a noble lady and magician who had hardly ever exercised, looked like she was paddling in place as she ran, her movements uncoordinated and clumsy. Her breath came in short gasps, and she appeared on the verge of collapse. At that moment, she seemed completely drained. She opened her mouth to call for help, but only a strained gasp escaped her lips. Her wide, desperate eyes turned to Ash, silently pleading for assistance, her expression so distressed it looked as though she might burst into tears. The magic nullifying crystal, capable of blocking nearby magic and renowned for being the hardest mineral, was completely unusable by ordinary humans when magic was ineffective. Its immense magical energy was almost impossible to harness. While brute force could theoretically break it, doing so would likely cause an enormous explosion. This thought frustrated Ash. Without hesitation, he reached out and grabbed Fern, who happened to be within arm's reach, hoisting her onto his left shoulder. Then, with his right hand, he grabbed Sense and tucked her under his other arm. Even with both of them hanging off him, Ash strode forward at an impressive pace. Amid the surprised cries of the two, he quickly overtook Frieren, who had been running ahead of them. Ah! Frieren stopped abruptly, stunned by what she was seeing. After a moment of hesitation, she shouted, "Hey!" and leaped toward Ash at the bottom of the slope. Clinging tightly to his neck, she glared at him with a mix of disbelief and exasperation. "What are you doing? I'll die if I fall," Frieren said flatly, wrapping her arms tighter around his neck. "You're always so good at running away. How could you fall?" "Honestly, I've never even seen you trip," Ash replied, his tone tinged with irritation. "Even so, something unexpected could happen," Frieren snapped. Despite his frustration, she clung stubbornly, hanging off him like a pendant. Confident in his balance, she refused to let go. And so, with a resigned sigh, Ash became a makeshift means of transportation for the three of them, trudging along with their combined weight. Chased by the rolling magic nullifying crystal, Ash sprinted for a considerable distance before they finally reached a fork in the road. The moment Ash charged into the fork, the three girls turned back to see the magic sealing stone continuing down another path. Unconsciously, All three let out relieved sighs. Thank goodness we had Ash, Frieren said, her voice a mix of amazement and lingering fear. Otherwise, I don't think we'd have made it in time. If I'd fallen, I'd have been crushed for sure. This labyrinth even has something like that. How fascinating. Sliding off Ash's back, she dusted off her clothes and gave him a thumbs up. Though there was a hint of relief on her face, her excitement from the ordeal was more evident than anything else. I don't find it fascinating at all. Getting crushed to death without being able to resist would be far too tragic, Fern muttered, her fingers trembling slightly even after they were out of danger. Sense, still limp like a doll, let Ash hold her by the waist as she glanced at his hands. A flicker of gratitude crossed her expression as she murmured, I feel the same. This truly is an unconquered labyrinth, and it's filled with hazards meant for magicians. For a tomb from the great unification period of the Empire, it's not surprising that there are things like this here. When we started, didn't you boast that, as a first-class magician, you could handle even the most desperate and troublesome situations? Fern interjected, her tone sharp with resentment. And yet, you ran with us. In the end, you still relied on Lord Ash to save you. Her glare turned to sense, her frustration clear. After all, she was the one who had chosen this treacherous examination site. Even so, after meeting Master Ash, I've often found myself facing things that even a first-class magician wouldn't be able to handle, Sense admitted, her expression gradually returning to its usual blank demeanor. She glanced up at the girl perched on Ash's shoulder and added seriously, besides, haven't you always been by Ash's side? You should be the one to listen to such words. Sense, you've grown up, Ash said with a satisfied smile, clearly impressed. However, despite receiving his praise, Sense's expression twisted slightly, as if she had just swallowed a fly. Lowering her head, she muttered with a hint of frustration, I'd rather not have this strange kind of growth. Growth, whether good or bad, is still growth. It shouldn't be defined so casually, because growth itself cannot be defined, Ash replied, his tone suddenly philosophical. Even though what you're saying sounds reasonable, it's just nonsense, isn't it? Sense, already familiar with his twisted logic, couldn't help but glare at him, her eyes filled with displeasure. Ash, undeterred, countered with a righteous tone. Maybe it is nonsense, but doesn't it make sense? As long as it makes sense, isn't that enough? Not at all. Well, when you finally understand this, you'll definitely become a mature adult like me. I'm already an adult, but you still treat me like a child, Sense retorted, unable to hold back her irritation this time. She added accusingly, honestly, are you really mature? You're just being willful, aren't you? Even mature and dependable adults need to relax sometimes, Ash said with a shrug. But normally, adults should try not to cause trouble for others. If that's the case, you should talk to Saria about it first. I'm sure, she wouldn't be on your side. The strange example left Sense speechless. Perhaps she felt the argument wasn't worth pursuing, or maybe she just didn't want to deal with him anymore. Either way, Sense's earlier attempt at twisted logic clearly influenced by Ash had already drawn attention. Frieren, still lying on Ash's shoulder, couldn't help but poke his forehead with her finger. Master Ash, don't you think it's time to reflect on yourself? I don't think there's anything I need to reflect on. At the very least, you've led Master Sense astray. That's just her natural talent. It's not my fault. You grown up. All right. Maybe I've made some mistakes, Ash said at last, turning his head slightly as the girl on his shoulder puffed up her cheeks in protest. Reluctantly, he admitted to having influenced Sense in some less than positive ways. However, even with this half-hearted acknowledgement, both girls still looked far from satisfied with his choice of words. After taking a brief rest to recover from their ordeal, the two girls finally climbed off Ash's shoulders. They took the opportunity to explain that they had originally been part of several small teams assigned to work together on the attack on the king's tomb. Other teams, including those of Kan, Lawine, and Denkan, had been with them as well. But shortly after entering the labyrinth, things had gone awry. Although no one had triggered a mechanism intentionally, a series of strange traps had been activated, throwing the entire group into chaos. The commotion had forced the teams to split up, and no one knew where the others had ended up. Somehow, these three had managed to stay together, following each other closely throughout the confusion. Note, you're giving power stones like crazy, I have to think of a different deal for next week, or I'm definitely going to die. Mission, reach for the peak. Objective, reach 1000 power stones before the end of this week. Status, mission completed. Reward, 3 chapters a day next week. Chapter 143, Usual Bickerings. As Denkin described the encounter with the trap, the three of them kept their eyes fixed on Ash. Feeling their stares, Ash crossed his arms over his chest and met their gazes steadily, giving no explanation for the matter, neither for the trap nor for their near-death experience. The three of them couldn't say anything to him. After all, he was the one who had solved the biggest problem and saved them in the end, even if they were almost crushed by the very mechanism he had triggered. Whether this could truly be considered a life-saving act was a matter of perspective. The long and exhausting escape left their clothes drenched in sweat, and both Fern and Sense began to subtly notice an unpleasant odor. From time to time, they would discreetly sniff at their clothes, trying to gauge if it was as bad as they thought. This unspoken behavior didn't escape Frieren, who was leaning against the wall, wiping sweat from her forehead as she caught her breath. Normally uninterested in such trivial matters, she couldn't help but be curious, especially since she had watched Fern grow up. After observing for a while, she finally asked, her tone teasing. "Fern, why do you keep sniffing your clothes? Are you trying to figure out who smells worse?" The moment those words left her mouth, the previously noisy corridor fell into an awkward silence. The atmosphere, which had been a mix of post-crisis relief and mild weirdness, suddenly turned inexplicably solemn. A faint tension, coupled with embarrassment, filled the air. Sense opened her mouth slightly, as if to respond, but no words came out. Fern's face turned bright red, and her fists clenched tightly on her thighs as her shoulders tensed. She glared at Frieren, her embarrassment transforming into a simmering anger. Realizing she might have said something inappropriate but not fully understanding why, Frieren blinked in confusion. Her eyes darted to Ash for support, and with a guilty expression, she tugged at the corner of his clothes, whispering, "Ash, help me out here." "But isn't this entirely your fault?" Ash replied flatly. "Why?" she exclaimed, shocked by his response. Feeling betrayed, she threw her arms out dramatically. "What did I even say? Did I say something bad? Or are you all mad because I was the fastest runner earlier? But that's always been the case. You can't suddenly get upset over it now. You're actually worse than me," Ash muttered under his breath, astonished at her ability to say such things so calmly. At that moment, Fern's expression turned icy. "Lady Frieren," she said coldly, her tone heavy with formality, "we will have a serious discussion about this matter when we return." "Ah. Frieren whimpered, startled by her sudden shift in demeanor. Feeling wronged, she moved closer to Ash, lowering her head as she muttered in a dissatisfied tone, "Ash, this is all your fault." "No? How is this my fault? Be reasonable." Ash shot back, exasperated. "It's your fault for not telling me what was going on with them in the first place," she argued. "If I told you earlier, I'd be the one they're mad at now. So, no thanks. Don't drag me into this." Annoyed by her self-centeredness, Ash moved to the front, trying to put some distance between himself and her to avoid further arguments or worse, unintentionally drawing more ire from Fern and Sense. But Frieren, still puzzled and unwilling to let it go, followed him. The more she thought about it, the less sense it made. Frowning, she asked again, "Why? I really don't get it." Ash stopped, letting out a helpless sigh. Turning back to face her, he smiled faintly and placed a hand on her head, ruffling her hair like she was a wayward child or perhaps like someone humoring an immortal being incapable of understanding mortal nuances. Shaking her head lightly, he said, "It's fine. Sometimes staying like this clueless and carefree is your charm. Just leave it be and don't overthink things." "It's bad enough that you won't explain anything," Frieren grumbled, puffing out her cheeks. "But now you're making fun of me too? You're the worst." Frieren slapped Ash's hand away in dissatisfaction, grumbling as she tidied her messy hair. Although her heart still held many questions and concerns, she reluctantly set them aside for the moment because there must be something interesting waiting for us. "Let's cheer up and move forward together," she said with determination. After fixing her hair, she strode ahead, her mind already filled with excitement over the possibility of discovering a magic book deep within the dungeon. Her focus shifted entirely to exploring the maze. Her swift recovery surprised the three of them. Fern, who had initially intended to speak with her properly, instinctively quickened her pace to follow. Just as she was about to catch up, she suddenly seemed to recall something. She turned to look at Ash, then grabbed Frieren's hand. "Wait a moment, Lady Frieren. What's the matter?" Frieren asked warily, her voice tinged with guilt, as if worried she were a child about to be scolded. Seeing her defensive reaction, Fern shook her head and sighed. "I'm not trying to lecture you. I just think you should treat Master Ash's wound." "Ah, if it's that serious, can't I just spit on it and wipe it clean?" Frieren quipped. She raised her right hand toward Ash, signaling him to crouch down. Without much thought, her casual tone gave the impression she might slap him like a parent disciplining a child. Fern, stunned by her nonchalance, froze for a moment before suddenly pulling her back. "Wait a minute. What are you planning to do?" "Relax, I'm just kidding," Frieren replied with a grin as she reached into her bag and pulled out a roll of gauze. "Why didn't you bring the Holy Scripture but brought this instead?" Fern asked, her confusion evident. "If we find something valuable, the gauze can be used to make a backpack," she answered matter-of-factly. "What kind of bizarre skill is that? Please bring the Holy Scripture next time." Fern shot back, exasperated. "But I only know very basic goddess magic," she admitted sheepishly. "The healing effect is practically non-existent." Even though Frieren claimed to be joking, Fern, as expected, launched into a direct lecture. Ash, naturally, did not involve himself in the argument and simply stayed back, letting it play out. Sense followed silently, her gaze flickering to the wound on Ash's face. She seemed to recognize what might have caused it, though she chose to remain quiet. Chapter 144, Ultimate Motivation is to Pursue Miracles. As the creator of the technique, Sense understood all too well the consequences of attacking with her hair, which was fortified with numerous defensive spells and endowed with exceptional strength and precision. This knowledge caused her to hesitate for a long time. Finally, she parted her lips slightly and asked hesitantly. "Master Ash, the wound on your face, was it caused by me?" "Ah, yes, it was your clone," Ash replied casually, waving his hand as if it were nothing. Sense, however, lowered her head in guilt. "I'm sorry. If I hadn't entered, or if I'd brought the Holy Scripture." "It's fine," Ash interrupted gently. "You're the examiner, and you came in just to assess the situation. By principle, you can't interfere with what happens. Besides, this is just a minor injury. Like Frieren said, a bit of saliva and a quick wipe would do the trick." Sense fell silent, her gaze fixed blankly on him. Noticing her hesitation, Ash quickly added, fearing she might misunderstand him as some sort of weirdo. "No, don't just go quiet now. I didn't mean it literally. I don't actually want you to smear saliva on it." "Really?" Sense asked, her tone skeptical. "Why are you doubting me now of all times?" Her half-believing, half-doubtful look made Ash feel a sharp pang in his chest, as if an invisible sword had stabbed him. He understood, of course, that he was often seen as a bit eccentric, but even so, he'd hoped to maintain at least a shred of dignity. Dash. After this brief exchange, Frieren, despite her near-death experience, seemed as enthusiastic about the dungeon as ever. She walked ahead, poking at walls and inspecting random corners with a boundless curiosity that suggested she hadn't learned anything from the earlier danger. Her behavior resembled that of a student on a carefree picnic. "Lady Frieren truly has a fondness for dungeons," Fern remarked with a sigh, his earlier anger now mostly dissipated as he watched her tap on the walls with childlike excitement. Although Ash maintained a necessary distance due to their sweat, he couldn't help but explain under the curious gazes of the other two girls. "She's always had a thing for treasure hunting, but recently, after hearing something Himmel said, she's been exploring entire dungeons as if they're a newly discovered world, rather than heading straight for the depths." "What did Himmel say?" Fern asked, her curiosity piqued. "Well, Himmel gave a long speech at the time. At first, Frieren wasn't interested, but one sentence changed everything: there might be a precious magic book at a fork in the road." After hearing that, Frieren immediately became obsessed with exploring every corner of the dungeon instead of just simple treasure hunting. Ash couldn't help but shake his head as he recalled Frieren's reaction. The moment Himmel mentioned the magic book, her eyes had lit up, and she'd rushed off instantly, dragging everyone else along in her excitement. Fern's expression turned slightly awkward. "That does sound exactly like something Lady Frieren would do." "Indeed," Ash agreed. In the 1,000 years since her master's death, she's spent most of her time wandering alone, searching for magic books. Occasionally, she goes off into the mountains or forests by herself, but if someone tells her there's a magic book buried somewhere, she'll probably dig up every tomb within a few kilometers of that location. Digging up graves might be excessive, Sense interjected, but isn't it amazing? If she's worked so hard, she must have discovered some very powerful magic, right? You're still too naive, Sense, Ash said, placing a hand on her head and feeling the softness of her long hair as he shook his head gently. The truth is, most of the magic books she's found are completely useless. After searching for thousands of years? Scouring every dungeon with such effort? And it's all been in vain? Sense asked, disbelief evident in her voice. It sounds unbelievable, but it's the truth. I haven't heard of her uncovering anything worthwhile, Ash replied with a shrug. Ash's sigh-like tone didn't sit well with Fern, who retorted earnestly, that's not true. Some of these magics are incredibly useful. For example? Ash asked, raising an eyebrow. The magic to clean rust off bronze statues, brew hot tea instantly, remove stubborn grease stains, kill mold, and make flipping pancakes effortless. Aren't those all incredibly useful? Fern began listing them on her fingers, speaking with confidence. Her face lit up with admiration and pride as she recounted what she considered legendary lost magics. But as Fern finished, both Sense and Ash exchanged odd looks. They simply couldn't grasp the appeal of collecting such magic. Sense stood there, stunned into silence, unsure how to respond. Meanwhile, Ash covered his face with his hand and sighed deeply. Aren't these just Grandma's household tricks? Don't insult those legendary magics. Fern snapped, clearly offended. What would you do if mold appeared on your clothes? In that case, wouldn't magic to remove mold be incredibly convenient? I'd just buy a new outfit, Ash replied flatly. That's such a waste of money. What about the magic to remove stubborn grease stains? It'd be troublesome to scrub it off yourself, wouldn't it? Or are you so wasteful you'd just throw out pots and pans after using them once? I don't cook. And if that's not an option, I'd hire a maid, Ash replied with an indifferent shrug. Ugh. Fern puffed her cheeks in frustration, clearly irritated by Ash's dismissive attitude. Ash, seeing Fern's growing frustration, stiffened slightly before seeming to come to a realization. Lightly tapping his palm with his fist, he quickly changed his tone. No, wait. Thinking about it, it's better to have those magics than not, sometimes. Exactly. Master Ash seriously lacks common sense, Fern declared triumphantly. Yes, it's all my fault, Ash replied, sighing in mock defeat. Despite his verbal agreement, Ash couldn't help but wonder why Fern, a teenager in the prime of her life, had such a grandmotherly mindset about practical magics. Was it Frieren's influence? Glancing at her now cheerful expression, Ash could only sigh internally, feeling a mix of amusement and helplessness. It was obvious he was humoring Fern like a parent coaxing a child, which made Sense shake her head quietly in disapproval. Although their goal was to reach the dungeon's deepest point, they had plenty of time to spare. Frieren, ever the enthusiast, wandered around like a treasure hunter, eagerly searching every corner. After all, this was an unconquered maze, and while its full contents were unknown, the presence of treasures was certain. Ash himself couldn't deny his curiosity. The group followed Frieren's enthusiastic lead to a hidden fork in the road, where they discovered an ancient treasure chest at the end of the path. Unsurprisingly, Frieren squatted down in front of the chest, her chin resting on her hand as she studied it intently, her expression thoughtful. Her prolonged silence finally prompted Fern, who always doted on her, to speak up gently. Lady Frieren, how much longer do you plan to look at it? It's already been identified as a treasure chest monster. True, the identification result says it's a treasure chest monster, Frieren replied, not taking her eyes off the chest. But, Fern, that magic's accuracy is 99%. That means there's still a 1% chance it's wrong. Ash chuckled, placing a hand on Fern's shoulder. Before Frieren could reply, Ash recited one of her famous quotes that he remembered all too well. It is precisely because of the great magicians who see through the 1% chance that history is made. This is the ultimate motivation for us as magicians to pursue miracles and create history. It sounds inspiring, Fern admitted, though her expression remained skeptical. Her subtle frown and doubtful eyes made it clear she wasn't entirely convinced. But no matter how you put it, that reasoning feels like a bit of a stretch. Chapter 145, The Devoured Frieren. Frieren, who received genuine praise from her companions for the first time, was so overjoyed that her eyes lit up with excitement. She stood up abruptly, grabbed Ash's hand, and exclaimed, "Ash, don't you see? You truly are worthy of being my best friend. From this moment on, we're lifelong friends again. Although I don't know what we were before, I don't mind." "You'll probably change your words soon anyway," Ash replied, raising an eyebrow. "Hey? What do you mean by again?" Frieren blinked a few times, her expression blank with confusion. "It's fine, just get moving and stop wasting time here." "I'm waiting too," Ash said calmly. Gently pulling his hand free from hers, he placed both hands firmly on her shoulders, as if to encourage her, and spoke with confidence. "Your experience as a magician must be telling you there's a magic book inside, right? So trust yourself, Frieren. I also believe in you who believes in yourself." Ash. Her face lit up with joy, and her eyes shimmered with emotion. Even though no one had believed in her for so long, Ash's unwavering trust touched her deeply, almost bringing her to tears. In that moment, the bond of friendship and mutual understanding between the two subtly grew in the dim light of the labyrinth. Frieren wiped the corners of her eyes and, overcome with emotion, covered her face as she whispered, "After so many years, 10 centuries. After so much time, someone finally believes in my judgment. Today, finally. Finally, someone understands that I'm right." "Lady Frieren," Fern interjected, a look of disapproval on her face. "I don't want to burst your bubble, but if no one has believed you in all these years, have you ever considered that you might just be wrong?" Though the moment seemed heartfelt between Frieren and Ash, Fern's blunt remark soured the mood slightly. However, Frieren, now buoyed by someone's belief in her, was undeterred. She puffed out her chest and confidently shot back. "How could it possibly be my fault? If I don't even believe in myself, how could I have reached this happy moment now? If this is happiness, why don't you change your approach? That way, you'd surely gain more recognition and even more happiness," Fern suggested, her tone tinged with exasperation. "Because I believe in my choice. And you don't have time to trust the appraisal." "Not at all." Frieren, who had always carried herself with unwavering confidence, now seemed even more assured with Ash's encouragement. Her firm gaze made Fern question whether she was the one who was wrong, or if Frieren's belief in herself was truly justified. At the same time, Fern couldn't understand why Frieren, who seemed to distrust the results of magical appraisals, continued to perform them religiously. After all, she always announced the results anyway. While the two were at an impasse, Sense turned toward Ash and quietly asked, her voice low with curiosity. "Master Ash, has she ever truly succeeded? Or, is there some kind of flaw in modern identification magic?" "Well..." Ash hesitated, pulling Sense aside to explain in a quieter tone. "Actually, identification magic is almost never wrong. The probability of a mistake is less than 1%, but when you perform hundreds of appraisals, that one mistake is bound to show up eventually." Sense fell silent for a moment, processing the strange logic, before asking, "Do you really think it's worth believing in that less than 1% hope? It doesn't seem like something you'd normally do." "You're absolutely right about me," Ash admitted. "Then, if the odds are so low, why do you still encourage her?" "Because if she doesn't do this, she'll stay stuck, worrying endlessly in front of that treasure chest monster," Ash replied with a faint smile. "Ah, but maybe, after this, Frieren will finally give up?" Sense asked hesitantly, Ash's response beginning to make sense. She realized that Ash wasn't genuinely invested in Frieren's actions, he was just too bothered to argue and subconsciously went along with her. "But..." Seeing Sense's frowning face, Ash gave her a helpless smile and gently shook his head. "A normal person might give up, but... I've never seen her do so." "Hey? Really? Why would I lie to you? Then, what's the point of staying silent? I don't know her exact age, but I really hope she finishes quickly and doesn't waste too much time here. After all, there are plenty of treasure chest monsters in this dungeon. If she keeps dragging things out like this, who knows how long it'll take. Honestly, it might be easier if she just gets swallowed up early and saves us all the trouble." He spread his hands in exasperation, his blunt response leaving Sense speechless in the dim corner of the maze. After a long silence, Sense, unable to defend Frieren any further, glanced at the girl squatting in front of the treasure chest and murmured, "What a strange person." The others were equally at a loss when it came to Frieren, but she remained oblivious to their feelings. Bolstered by Ash's encouragement, she grew even more enthusiastic. Ignoring Fern's repeated warnings, she turned back to the treasure chest, looked over her shoulder at Ash, and gave him a confident smile. Her voice calm and full of determination, she declared, "Ash, trust me. If you believe in me, I won't let you down." "All right, I believe you," Ash replied. "Now hurry up and open it." "Okay. Now's the time to witness a miracle." At Ash's urging, Frieren grinned brightly and, with all her strength, flung the treasure chest open. But the instant she did, the chest revealed to be a treasure chest monster sprang to life, its mouth opening wide and swallowing her upper body in one swift motion. Her grand proclamation ended abruptly. In the dim and silent dead end, the only sound that remained was the unsettling noise of the treasure chest monster chewing. The other two, Fern and Sense, stood frozen in shock, unable to react. Frieren, whose upper body had been swallowed, remained quiet for a brief moment before breaking into frantic cries. She twisted her hips and kicked her legs wildly, screaming, "It's so dark! So scary! Ah! Oh wah! It's so dark! So scary! Ash! Fern! Help me! Let me out! It's so dark! It's so scary! Oh wah! Ash! Fern!" As Fern, still stunned, rushed forward to try and pull her out, Ash remained calm. He glanced at the equally stunned Sense, then, with a blank expression, slapped Frieren's twisting backside. "See, Sense," he said dryly. "This is the inevitable result, isn't it?" "Ah." Sense was completely at a loss for words, unable to respond. Frieren, feeling the slap, twisted her body even more violently and began kicking in Ash's direction. Who hit me?" "Ash. It must have been you," she shouted. "How could it be me?" Ash replied flatly. "Actually, it was Fern who couldn't resist." "No way. Absolutely not. You're the only one who'd hit me when I'm being eaten," she protested. "Don't be ridiculous. Sometimes Flam used to spar with me like this. But my teacher's been dead for years. You're the only one left who would take advantage of a situation like this." Frieren exclaimed, her tone filled with both certainty and indignation. Despite her protests, no one at the scene could muster any sympathy for her. Even Fern couldn't help but scold her. "If you knew this would happen, why did you still do it? Can't you learn a lesson for next time?" Fern said, exasperated. "But it's only by pursuing that 1% chance, by acting like the great magicians who make historic discoveries, that we can uncover miracles. Do you think I got bitten because I liked it?" Frieren wailed. "But in the end, you didn't see through anything. You fell for the trap, didn't you?" Fern retorted, shaking her head in frustration. Chapter 146, Strange Trust. "You didn't see through anything. You fell for the trap, didn't you?" Fern said, shaking her head in frustration. "A small failure. It can happen to anyone, but you can't give up everything just because of a small failure." Frieren's whole body was soft, and her butt was also soft when she was spanked, but her words remained as stubborn as ever. This made Ash casually pat Fern's head and shake it, saying, "From the actual situation, you've been caught more than once. It's better to say that I've seen it happen hundreds of times. Anyway, it will definitely work this time. And, you spanked me again, didn't you? And lied to me again. You liar! You traitor! I will never forgive you this time." Frieren shouted, struggling fiercely as she gnashed her teeth. "Last time, you promised me that the church would stand on my side next time. You treacherous bastard! Now you're betraying me again and again. Although I did agree to that, you have to consider the actual situation. How can I stand by you after something like this? It's easier for you because you're a girl. If I said something similar, I'd definitely end up in a much worse situation than you," Ash replied, letting out a heavy sigh. If he foolishly told Fern and Sense what they were truly concerned about, Ash doubted they'd hesitate to start a fight with him. For that reason alone, he couldn't stand by Frieren's side in this matter, even though he had originally intended to keep his promise. Though he felt she deserved it, Fern couldn't help but pity Frieren as she looked so pitiful while being spanked. While holding her legs and trying to pull her out, Fern turned to Ash and pleaded, "Master Ash, please let her off for now and help me pull her out quickly." "Fern, it's because you always pamper her like this that she acts recklessly and never learns her lesson," Ash replied, shaking his head. "I'll give her a good scolding when we get back. So hurry up and help me." Fern insisted. "No, I think I'll leave first," Ash said calmly. "Master Ash. Actually, don't bother pulling her out. Push her further in. That way, the treasure chest monster will feel uncomfortable and spit her out," Ash suggested nonchalantly. Without looking back, he left the scene, clearly not wanting to deal with Frieren's tantrum later. Fern stood there in a daze for a long time, processing the strange little trick. She wondered how many times she had pulled Frieren out in the past, all while considering Ash's method with half belief and half doubt. She pushed Frieren further in, lightly pounding her head against the inside of the treasure chest monster as if she were pounding garlic. Suddenly, there was a puff sound, similar to the sound of a cork popping out of a bottle. The treasure chest monster finally spat Frieren out. "Fern, where's Ash? I won't let him go this time." Frieren groaned as she fell to the ground, clutching her sore buttocks and looking around for the man who had taken advantage of her misfortune. Fern stood there, still dazed, while Sense, who had not followed Ash, stared blankly at Frieren. When she turned to Sense for answers, she simply raised her hand and pointed toward the intersection where they had come from. But now, there wasn't even a trace of Ash, no figure, no sound of footsteps. "Damn it! He escaped first. I knew that guy was so cunning from beginning to end." Frieren muttered angrily, rubbing her sore buttocks as frustration made her grind her teeth. Unfortunately, for the time being, there was nothing she could do about him. Fern sighed and shook her head, her expression resembling that of a parent scolding a mischievous child. She took out a handkerchief and began wiping Frieren's hair while asking. "Come to think of it, Lady Frieren, you just said that after 10 centuries, someone finally believed you. Was there anyone else 1,000 years ago?" "It was still Ash, and Master," Frieren replied, sitting on the ground with her arms folded across her chest. She turned her face away angrily, naming the two people she was most familiar with. But this answer only deepened Fern's confusion. Since she had fallen for the same trick before, why would she fall for it again? Fern's mind was spinning with questions. "What impolite thoughts are you having with that look in your eyes?" Frieren snapped. "Does Lady Frieren's master truly believe in Lady Frieren?" Fern asked hesitantly. "No. Master was just as much of a bastard as Ash," Frieren muttered, her voice dripping with irritation. This wasn't the first time she'd been tricked in this way, and she knew the reason all too well. 1,000 years ago, her master and Ash had taken turns using the same excuse. Whenever they were caught by her, their pleas for mercy were eerily identical. They both found her hesitation in front of the treasure chest monsters too bothersome and thought it was better for her to be swallowed quickly. After recounting this, Frieren muttered with a sullen expression, "Master is no longer around to take revenge on, but Ash. I won't let him off so easily. This time, I'll settle all the old and new scores together. Yes, he'll pay for Master's share too." Even though she fell for their tricks every time, her anger toward the two of them never diminished. This perplexed Sense, who tilted her head in confusion, blinking her white eyes several times. She simply couldn't understand if Frieren was so aware of why others lied to her, why did she keep falling for the same trick? It must be because too much time had passed after 1,000 years, perhaps she had simply forgotten. Sense couldn't think of any other explanation. After spanking Frieren for the first time in a while, Ash, feeling oddly refreshed, made his way deeper into the dungeon to search for Kin, La Wine and the others. While he acknowledged that it wasn't exactly commendable to toy with Frieren's trust after 1,000 years and let her feel happy for nothing, he rationalized that if it taught her a lesson and prevented her from being swallowed by treasure chest monsters again, it might be worth it. But if she could change, wouldn't she have done so 1,000 years ago? Ash murmured to himself. As for why Frieren hadn't even the slightest hint of caution, it was probably because she sincerely believed every time that the treasure chest was genuine. So, why should she be wary of treasure chests? And as for learning a lesson, how can a gambler learn one? How many gamblers truly change after making mistakes? Even if they've lost everything, most gamblers would still gamble without hesitation. This was true for ordinary gamblers, let alone a veteran gambler like Frieren. Every time she was tricked, it was always the same. Because of this, after some brief annoyance, Ash simply set aside any guilt and gave up on the idea of helping Frieren grow up. However, as Ash searched for the other candidates, he found no sign of them. Instead, he stumbled across Sense in another open area of the dungeon. Unfortunately, it was just a clone. Her hair, which was already unusually long, had grown even longer, almost unnaturally so. Her entire figure appeared to float eerily in midair. If described in words, the scene would inevitably evoke an unsettling blend of absurdity and ominousness. Note 1, as promised, I will be uploading 3 chapters a day for this week. Today, I'll be uploading 4 chapters because you've also earned 2 extra chapters. One will be uploaded today, and the other tomorrow. Now, here's a new mission for this week. Mission, the Power Stone's Ascent. Objective, climb as high as possible in the power ranking system and maintain the spot for a week. Rewards. Rank 1 to 5, 3 chapters a day. Rank 6 to 12, 2 chapters a day. Rank 13 to 20, 4 extra chapters. Punishment, if we fail to reach at least the top 20, you'll only get 1 chapter a day. Chapter 147, The Slash Emerging from Despair. The petrified face and posture of Sense's replica inexplicably fit the image of a giant deep-sea octopus under the interweaving of dim light and shadow, especially those tentacles that seemed to extend endlessly, adding a bit of frightening meaning. Looking from a distance, if you couldn't see the petite body clearly, this scene alone was enough to make people feel cold and send chills down their spine. But while Ash only felt this faint discomfort, the 3-person team that was nervously confronting Sense's replica was genuinely terrified. Their tension had almost reached its peak. Every slight movement seemed as though it might trigger a fatal crisis. Cold sweat kept dripping down their cheeks like a steady drizzle. Finally, Ash's figure came into view. The leading girl, who was wearing knee-length black stockings and had a strawberry blonde mushroom-like hairstyle, couldn't help but shout out, "Please! Save me! No, right? If I deal with Sense's replica like this, the exam will become too easy, and Sense will be angry, wouldn't she?" Ash said, spreading his hands in an entirely helpless gesture. Sense's clone, which had originally intended to destroy the 3 people, now seemed wary of him because of his sudden appearance. It seemed to recall that they had once joined forces to confront him before. This was also when the girl, the second-level magician Edel, immediately suggested, "If I remember correctly, you've been collecting magic, haven't you? In the last exam, didn't you also get magic from other candidates?" "I roughly understand what you mean, but please don't look down on me." Ash frowned slightly, shook his head sternly, and said, "If your lives are in danger, I'll help, but I won't destroy my principles just for magic. After all, Sense is my junior, and if she messes up the exam by accident, I can. Give me 10 gold coins and help me deal with this guy, and I'll teach you the magic passed down in my family." Born into a family proficient in spiritual, hypnosis, magic but living in extreme poverty, Edel had a great desire for money and to become a first-level magician. Although she was reluctant to hand over her family magic, she was tempted by the privileges of a first-class magician. To avoid being eliminated, she gritted her teeth, gave up her hesitation, and boldly asked for a reward of 10 gold coins. Even though Ash wanted to tell her that she was insulting him and tried to continue sticking to his principles, he hesitated. Despite being only a second-class magician with no combat ability, Edel's attainments in spiritual, hypnosis, magic were better than those of any first-class magician in the Continental Magic Association. Therefore, Ash opened his mouth, but in the end, he couldn't utter any harsh words. Instead, he nodded silently and stood firm in his position and principles. "All right. I'll give you 10 gold coins when you get out. Now hurry up and leave. I'll deal with the clone." "Okay. Then we'll retreat first. I'll leave this place to you." The unexpected deal left Edel feeling a little complicated, but she fled with her 2 companions without saying a word, leaving Ash standing there confronting the clone. Just like that, the 2 of them stared at each other for a long time. Feeling that the other party didn't seem to have much intention of attacking, Ash silently stepped back. The entire process went unexpectedly smoothly. There was no conflict at all, and he completed the transaction. It was so simple that he even started to wonder if he should give Edel some extra money or something. After separating from Edel, Ash continued wandering the dungeon. This time, he tried his best to stick to his earlier resolve of not interfering in the exam as much as possible. He wanted to avoid facing Sense's accountability later or causing unnecessary casualties during the final round. It wasn't long before he came across a scene that forced him to pause. The silver-haired girl with the umbrella, who had been separated from Frieren by the mechanism, was running for her life, her body covered in wounds. Chasing after her was none other than a copy of Yubel. Although they were both third-class magicians, Yubel's strength was clearly superior. Moreover, La Wine, who specialized in matter manipulation, was at a clear disadvantage against Yubel's cutting magic. After a brief attempt at resistance followed by a long chase, La Wine, exhausted and out of options, was finally forced into a corner. Gritting her teeth, she turned abruptly, raising her wand. Dozens of ice cones emerged in an instant, causing the temperature in the narrow corridor to drop sharply. Under her command, the floating ice cones flew in interlaced patterns toward the approaching clone. The sharp, pointed ends of the ice cones could have easily pierced through a human body. Yet, with seemingly effortless movements, the clone twisted its form and evaded the chaotic attack. Fury overtook La Wine. Determined to fight to the death, she roared and aimed the tip of her wand, summoning a fierce white storm. A barrage of dense ice cones poured out like bullets, raising a thick white mist that engulfed the narrow passage, leaving no room for the clone to escape. However, when faced with this inescapable attack, the clone swung its wand with a calm and vigorous motion. Boom! 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 In an instant, countless invisible slashes shot out like a sword dance, slicing through the barrage of ice cones. The once lethal projectiles were reduced to glittering fragments that floated through the air. The scene was visually mesmerizing, but unfortunately, La Wine was in no state to appreciate its beauty. As the incoming slashes approached, she instinctively raised her wand to cast defensive magic. While the magic successfully blocked the slashes, it couldn't stop the damage around her. The statues on both sides of the corridor were cut down and began collapsing toward her from above. Her eyes widened in shock. She turned to flee, but in her panic, she failed to notice a gap in the ground caused by the slashes. She staggered, lost her balance, and fell instantly. "I'm really done for this time." The thought raced through her mind as her cheek scraped against the cold, hard ground. The sudden, sharp pain drove the realization home she had fallen helplessly, with no way to recover. The clone, relentless in its pursuit, continued approaching slowly. The fear of death gripped her like invisible chains, making even the slightest movement feel impossible. Her fingers trembled, unable to reach the escape bottle hanging from her waist. Her body was covered in scars, as though slashed by sharp blades. The abrasions on her face burned with pain, eroding her senses further. Her azure eyes, clouded with grief, reflected despair. A shadow of helplessness loomed over her pale, handsome face. "Damn it!" she cursed through gritted teeth. In the last moments before succumbing to her fate, she closed her eyes, bracing herself for death. But then, a new sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Before she could look back, a blade flashed through the air like lightning, leaving behind a dazzling silver-white arc. In a single, precise stroke, Yubel's body was cleaved neatly in two, from the left shoulder to the right side. The movements were so fluid, like the perfect lines an artist draws on a canvas. The exceptional slashing technique was so precise and sharp that the severed flesh immediately lost all sensation. It was as though time had frozen at the moment of the strike. Only after a few seconds, when reality caught up with the astonishing speed, did the dark blood gush from the wound, as if the body was waking from a dream. The replica's form tilted, broke apart, and disintegrated, transforming into black debris that scattered through the air before vanishing completely.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.